Many years ago, my mom called in the month of December with great delight. It's like, you won't believe it. They don't have enough kids for the Christmas pageant, so I get to be a shepherd this year. Now, since my mom only stood about 5 feet tall, she kind of blended in with the rest of the youth. And whatever thing, and I'm supposed to probably know that name, whatever thing we put on a shepherd's head, that little drape, that would kind of cover up the soft white curls that framed her face and would kind of camouflage the smile lines that were around her eyes. Might keep others from noticing who she is. But I will tell you, every pageant director would dream of plugging her quintessential grandmotherly calm against a bunch of fidgety youngsters who are arguing and fighting over the stuffed sheep. When we cast Christmas pageants with those that we love, we costume them in charming robes and we stage it in warm sanctuaries. And enacting Jesus' birth in this way whitewashes the shock of his impoverished origins. It also diminishes the revolution that God begins among those least prepared and whom we think are least capable of changing the world for good. So I invite you to continue listening with me to this Christmas story as we think about the next people who are drawn into God's plan to save us. I'll continue reading from the 2nd chapter of the Gospel of Luke. When the angels had heard them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go now to Bethlehem and see this thing that has taken place, which the Lord has made known to us." So they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the manger. When they saw this, they'd made known what had been told to them about the child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured these words and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds then returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen, just as it had been told to them. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You know, simple gestures can communicate so powerfully. An infant's smile is going to send a parent to the moon with joy. And when our preschoolers walk through the hallways, whether because it's Sunday school or they're there for nursery school, they have these little waves, and that just absolutely warms our hearts. But as these little angels grow, they learn some other small acts. Teens, in particular, teens can signal to you with just small gestures that your ideas are stupid with just a slight roll of their eyes. To be on the receiving end of an eye roll is to experience quite viscerally someone else's disdain. To be condescended to be told that you're boring, frustrating, or simply beyond words. Almost a reflex, this one brief flicker arouses an intense response within their intended target, and we rarely forget when we receive an eye roll from someone. And the person who rolls their eyes can be relieved that they didn't even need to speak a word or breath, and they can also protect their innocence. And they can say, well, I didn't say anything that would be demeaning. The writer of Luke's gospel knew that the mere mention of the word shepherd would provoke an eye roll. Our modern day naivete has swallowed the folklore of King David that glamorizes a young boy's rise from country shepherd to become king. It's the original rags to riches story. We love to hold on to the idea of David as a king and all of his riches and all of his glory, and we want to gloss over the fact that for much of his life he was off in the hinterlands, literally in rags. That's what a shepherd does. To the ears of the first century Palestine refined city dwellers, the mention of shepherds would have provoked far more than just an eye roll. Jewish writings of the time advised, I quote, "A man should not teach his son to be a donkey driver, camel driver, sailor, or herdsman, for theirs is the trade of thieves." And I sanitized some of those words for the pulpit. No one aspires to be a shepherd. You fell into that job because it's the last thing you can possibly do. Shepherds are considered thugs, and they smell of manure, and they reek of shame. Shepherds were not welcome in the city walls, could not be trusted, and to these lowest of the low, they deserved contempt. And it's to these people that the gospel writer claims the angels appear. Now, those who heard the gospel at first might not have been fazed at the idea of a virgin's birth, but they would have been stunned to know that God chose the very last people anyone would trust, shepherds, to be the very first messengers of this good news. I have to admit, earlier this morning as I was finishing this, I got to thinking, I wonder how many other people those angels went to that might have been of a higher status, and the angels told the good news, but the folks said, yeah, no, we're too busy. We're not ready. We don't think we can do that. And maybe that's a meditation for next year. We need to hear the story of shepherds first as an in-our-face reminder of God's presence with and preference for those whom others deem worthless. You know, we've elevated the familiar openings of the Christmas story with the warm glow of candlelight, and we've surrounded it with fragrant garlands and gleaming tinsel. We even have these beautiful hand-carved figurines or beautiful painted porcelain of a nativity scene. These delicate figures in no way resemble the original gritty humans. Luke doesn't tell us that there's any comfort in this story. But what we know is these smelly, lowly shepherds hurry to meet Joseph and Mary in the manger. Those parents had journeyed from the miserable town of Nazareth. It doesn't say so in the text, but we know from the first century what we need to imagine is that Nazareth would be the equivalent of filled with Section 8 housing. It's not a place that any of us would aspire to live. And Mary and Joseph are sent from there to a place of even lesser significance, Bethlehem. It's probably 90 miles away, and they're walking 1,400 feet up. Not something you want to do when you're pregnant. Caesar and Herod, the political rulers and politicians at the time, are playing them like marionettes on a string, forcing them to register for a census, and that census is nothing more than code words to provide a tax and a control mechanism. And in a companion gospel, the Gospel of Matthew, it records that the only other people willing to risk themselves to the angel's message are foreigners from the east. They arrive, they get to the manger, they offer their gifts, and later they flee for their lives just before Mary and Joseph and the infant become immigrants themselves. And yet, God chooses these people. And this is where faith flickers most brightly. God entrusts this collection of humanity with the Messiah. Now we're living 2,000 years later. 2,000 years is a long time, but yet we still live in a world with communities and homes that are deeply divided. So isn't this the good news of great joy for all people that we need to hear today? At a time when we feel as though we might be judged for who we love and what we value, when it feels so risky to venture into the cross-section of humanity that we're choosing not to, when we feel the weariness of trying to bridge these divides but find that other people only seem to deepen them, and that's when we just want to recoil in fear or hide behind thick walls. Why does it feel like the weight of healing rests on our shoulders? Because we know we can't live this way. And toxic attitudes will poison us just as surely as fear further divides us. So the gift, the glory of Christmas is that God has come to be with us in our discontent, our resignation, our ill-preparedness. God comes to be with us when all of that contempt would rather turn us from one another. The gift and glory of Christmas is that God shows us the way to heal our prejudices, and that our fickle, frail humanity doesn't need to be the way in which we live, because God is going to show us the better way. The good news of the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, becomes life-changing news when we all start to live with Christ as the center of our lives. So now's the challenge. Somehow or another, we need to trust this ancient story and the promise given to us by Christ. With God's grace, we can open our eyes rather than roll them. We can see the other as a human first. We can open our heart to love before we open our mouths to spew hate. And after gazing at the Christ child, we can start to see the other not as evil, but as just another person trying to raise their children, save for retirement, care for the sick, and ensure their parents are okay. The Christmas story reminds us that none of us are perfect. You know, those shepherds, they had nothing. They couldn't control anything. They could not command or order or fix or repair. But yet that's how God chooses for peace to come into the world. Not when the powers that be finally decide to loosen the shackles that bind or level the playing field. It's when ordinary people say, Christ matters. God is in our lives, and love's gonna win. Peace comes into our world and our lives when we let our guard down and when we look at the face of a vulnerable Christ child and then all of the others there, and we all decide that we would rather believe that love is stronger than hate, and that's the way we will choose to live our lives. May it be so this night and every day, my friends. Amen.